All right. Well, I'm sitting here via Zoom from Indiana to the great state of Colorado with Rick Wehner, president and co-founder of Brewery Finance. Man, how are you?
I'm very well, man. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing fantastic. Being in the financial world, I always said that when I started this podcast, I wanted to kind of have interesting folks from around the craft brew universe. So we've done the brewery owners, we've done the brewer masters that make the beer. I had some guys on recently that are trying to do some things with technology to improve the lives of brewery owners. So
Sweet.
me being in the financial world, I thought, what better person to bring on than somebody that specifically deals with finance in the craft brew universe. And in honor of that, I always drink a beer when we have a meeting like this or record an episode. So I'm like, try to find a beer that exemplified the financial side of things. So we have Taxman from here in the great state of Indiana, going to be drinking a gold standard today. So hopefully you have a Colorado beer in front of you, and we'll do a cheers and start this thing, man.
I do. Right. I got myself a tree shaker mango IPA from Odell. I don't know if it's necessarily money themed, but I like to think we like to shake the money out of the trees. So we'll go ahead and put that one down.
All right, my man. Well, cheers. Good stuff.
Cheers. I appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic, man. Well, as I said, I want to bring interesting folks from around the craft brew universe. So for those that may be unfamiliar with Brewery Finance or what you guys do, I'd love to just kind of hear the origin story about how you got things started.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. I don't know how interesting we are, but I do like beer, and you do have a financial podcast, so it seems like a match made in heaven.
For
yeah,
sure.
Brewery Finance. I founded Brewery Finance back in 2005. My brother and I had just started an equipment finance company, just a small little brokerage house where we're basically finding people who have equipment for sale and matching them with people who need to purchase that kind of equipment. And it was a bit of a grind, a fun way to make a living. But I realized quickly that I needed to work with the customers who I enjoyed working with. When we first started, I was financing tractor trailers for people, or copying machines for real estate agents or something like that. And I mean, there's nothing more that'll make you want to drink a beer than doing business with that kind of industry. So I'd always been a home brewer ever since college, and a pretty terrible one at that, but certainly somebody who really loves beer. And so I at the same time, there's a brewery that was opening up right near my house. It was the guy who owned it was the owner of the local homebrew shop. And so I was there helping him paint the walls of the new brewery. This is back before the big explosion of breweries, but it was kind of right at the beginning, when things were starting to take off again. And I saw he had the Brewers Resource Directory sitting there on his bar. He didn't even have any bar stools yet. And I was thumbing through it. It was really nice and thin back then. And I was thumbing through, and I was like, you know what? Shit, man, there's not a single finance company in this directory. And the next day, I founded Brewery Finance as just a trade name for the company my brother and I had started, a couple months earlier. I went down to Boulder to the Brewers Association and introduced myself and said, hey, I'm Rick Wehner. I just started a company called Brewery Finance, and we're going to start financing equipment for breweries. And we'd like to be a member of the Brewers Association. So at that time, I mean, that was 15 or 16 years ago now, my hope was just to come across a deal here and there with somebody who was buying a fermenter or a keg washer or something like that, just so I could have my toe in the water with the brewers, an industry that I liked, an industry that I understood, like-minded people, how us beer geeks are. So it doesn't matter what your politics are. We can all discuss hops, So I introduced myself to the Brewers Association, and here we are 16 years later. I'm still doing it. Breweries are 100% my focus, along with now distilleries, kombucha makers, wineries, any cider makers, anything like that, any kind of fermented beverage will finance those guys. And I was real lucky. They always say it's better to be lucky than good. Well, I don't know. I was definitely lucky. I was at the right time at the right place. There was no competition back then. Nobody else was really focusing on financing just breweries. And I caught the industry right as it was starting to explode, and got in good with some really good vendors, some really good customers who were growing really quickly. And we just grew right along with them. It's been a sweet ride.
Right on, man. We said you were a home brewer. So I often ask, like, what was the first craft beer that hooked you? As I've said many times on the podcast, when I was in college, it was just what's the cheapest and most what's the cheapest beer we can get, right? So, but then I had a fat tire and it kind of like changed my palate a little bit. I was like, what is this? This is different, man. So with you having been a home brewing background, what was the first brew that hooked you and set you on this path?
It is funny. We're probably more alike than different, Jeff, because mine was also a fat tire.
Nice.
I was in college. They just opened an old Chicago's location where I went to, in the little town I went to school in. It's called Greeley, Colorado. One of the first chain restaurants, I guess, that showed up in that town back in the day. And they had a Fat Tire Tuesday special every Tuesday. We can go in there and get one of those little bowling pins of Fat Tire. And it was like, I think it was like $2 for a bottle or something like that back in the day. It was for a college kid, it was fantastic.
For sure.
And I bought it because it was affordable, and I kept drinking it because it was delicious. And so that was probably the gateway beer for me. I also at that time was working at a little heating and air conditioning place, making duct work during the summers. And that was in Longmont, which is, 40 minutes away from the town I was going to college in. And there was a little brewery right around the corner that had just started. There was just a couple guys that were it looked less like a brewery to me than just a cold space. But I'd go in there every now and then and buy bombers of like Sawtooth Ale. It was Left Hand Brewing Company. So right as they started, you could just buy a bomber right across the counter from one of the owners, be on your way. And so it was those amber and red ales that got me hooked in the beginning. Ironically, a style I don't even drink anymore.
That's fantastic, man. Now you guys said that you've been at this for 16 years. I mean, since 2005, I was doing, some background on your website there. I mean, you've done over 1,000 projects. You've helped fund, 55 million specifically in the craft beer space. I mean, when we talk about clientele, what is the clientele that predominantly makes up, what you guys have done over 16 years? Is it, that home brewer that's looking to make a leap and open up a place? Is it the place that's been operational for 3 to 5 years that's looking to level up? Or is it, a well-oiled machine that's looking to increase distribution to go, outside maybe their state and explore other parts of the country?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Our mix of clientele is kind of all over the board. I would say that, so we work with a lot of startups. They're always a little bit of a challenge to work with just because startups are hard to fund in any industry. It's just a high, doesn't get more risky than when you haven't sold a single thing yet,
Sure.
Sure. So those are tough, but I spend an unbelievable amount of time working with startups. The goal is to kind of get in early with them. And then as they grow, again, we grow right along with them. So once they're 2 or 3 years in business and no longer considered a startup, the financing gets much easier, it gets much cheaper. And as they need to get more fermenters or more kegs or add a canning line or something like that, we've got the experience with them, the pay history with them, and we can get them financed really quick and easy. But we get a lot of referrals from within the industry. Thankfully, we've got a good reputation and we fought hard to keep it for a long time. And so we get a lot of referrals from vendors who sell equipment. We got a lot of referrals from other brewers. And so those referrals are generally for clients who are 2 to 5 years in business or something like that. Average transaction size is usually around $75,000 to $150,000. It fits really neatly in what we call our little application only program. So we typically don't need to get financials or anything like that. We just are looking at some business credit, some personal credit, and quick, clean, easy transactions. And then occasionally we get a client who maybe started out with us, 5 years ago, and then worked their way up to where they're bankable. They don't really need somebody like Brewery Finance anymore, and they start working with their bank, and then out of nowhere they'll give us a call and just say, man, I need this 75 grand quick. The bank's a pain in the ass. Can you get this done for me? And it's like, yep, absolutely we do. So we work with them all over the board. Deals that are, $5,000 for a smaller order of kegs to, a $250,000 packaging system. So they're all over the place. But I'd say the majority of my time is spent with startups. The majority of my money is not made on startups.
Understood. Well, let me ask you this. What are some of when somebody comes to you for either the first time or maybe the 10th time, what are some of the major pain points for the breweries that you work with? And what are some of the solutions that you help them either overcome or provide?
Sure. A lot of times, no pun intended, it's a bottleneck in their process. They've got a lot of demand, but they don't have the right packaging line, or they don't have enough fermentation capacity or something like that. And so when you're a brewery and the name of the game is manufacturing, which is what it is at the end of the day, if you don't have enough tanks for the demand, you're losing out on an opportunity. And so one of those pain points is time. How quickly can I get another 30 barrel fermenter in here? A lot of times when you're going to your local bank, you're having to explain to them what a fermenter is and why it makes sense to buy one right now. And then they have to get together with their little committee. And I shouldn't be little at banks are good. They get together with their wonderful committee and they poke holes in your credit and your business plan and all that kind of thing. And get back to you a couple weeks later. And by that time, maybe that fermenter you had your eye on is sold, or the manufacturer is waiting for a deposit before they start making it. They have a 12-week lead time. What it boils down to is time is money. And if like I said earlier, some of those repeat customers come back to us, they're kind of sick of dealing with their bank or waiting for their bank. It's because we're quick and we can get things done for them quickly. And yes, we'll be a little bit more expensive, but if you can have that fermenter 3 months earlier, that's a lot of turns on your fermenter. You can make a lot of money. So that's probably the biggest pain point. I think every brewery is different. They're all run by individuals who all run businesses differently. And,
sure.
Some people never run into those capacity pain points. Sometimes it's, hey, we need $100,000 canning line. My credit is fantastic, but my partner, can't pay the bills to save his life. That's a major pain point because that's hurt your ability to get funding.
Sure.
So we see that kind of stuff all the time. But.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this, as far as some of the finer points of what you guys do, because obviously being in the financial world, I know the differences between a lot of different things, and obviously you're knee deep in it. But with regards to standard financing versus a lease, how do you explain that to some of the guys that may be new to trying to acquire financing or funding for either a startup, or maybe they just hadn't considered the different options before?
Sure. Yeah. First thing I would suggest is they take a drink.
Cheers.
It's a lot of it is kind of nuanced, but there really is a lot of differences. And I will confess, and I kind of wear this as a badge of pride, that I'm not really a finance guy. I'm really a beer guy who provides financing than a finance guy who works in the beer industry. So my background in college was English. But I somehow stumbled into this. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know everything there is about financing, but I certainly understand my corner of the finance world. Mm-hmm. And so what we provide are either capital leases, true leases, or what's called an equipment finance agreement. And a capital lease is like a lease with $1 buyout. So you're essentially agreeing to own that equipment at the end of the term, but you're going to treat it as a lease. Me as a lessor would own the equipment on paper until you've made your full commitment of payments. And then at the end of that term, you pay us $1 and you own the equipment. We sign, we release a lien essentially.
Gotcha.
The benefit of doing that is that it is, the equipment is considered yours in terms of the IRS, not mine, the breweries. As far as the IRS looks at it, that is the brewery's equipment. So you can take like your Section 179 deduction as if you owned the equipment, as if you paid cash for the equipment. You can see, I'm going to lose. See, if I was a better English major, I'd remember the word I was looking for.
All good. All good.
But anyway, so you can take all the depreciation. That's what I'm looking for. You can depreciate that asset on your books. If you're going to do a true lease, it would be like like the old copier machine leases back in the day. You would finance the equipment for a term of 36 or 48 or 60 months or whatever. And at the end of the term, you have the option of either purchasing it for fair market value, returning the equipment to the lessor in good condition, or simply continuing to make rental payments on it. Hardly anybody does that anymore, but it is a nice financial tool because it allows you to not necessarily own the asset, but to use the asset, and allow the underwriter will take the depreciation on it, but you just get to write off every monthly payment as if it's just a business expense. The other thing I mentioned was an equipment finance agreement. That's essentially like a lease with a $1 buyout, which I call the capital lease. And you just, instead of the $1 buyout, you just own the equipment at the end of the term. That's the closest to traditional financing that we offer. But the big difference is with traditional financing, you can pay the equipment off early without any kind of penalty. I mean, you can just pay the remaining principal on the transaction. With a lease, the kind we do, your payoff is number of payments remaining times monthly payment. So you're not getting penalized necessarily, but you're not going to save any money. Also with traditional financing, I think typically like the SBA or banks might offer a 10 or 15-year term or something like that. Whereas with a lease, it's going to be a shorter term. The benefit is it's much quicker. We have banks, like I kind of referred to earlier with the little finance committee, I believe is what I called it. But they have a credit window that's really small, and leasing companies don't have that restriction. We can look at things differently. We can really take the time to understand an industry or the story behind somebody's poor credit score, and we can open up our credit this big. And so we're much more flexible. We'll also provide 100% financing. So a lot of times with a bank, if you're financing $100,000 piece of equipment, they want maybe 20% down up front. Well, so you're really only financing $80,000.
Right.
We'll finance $100,000 and we'll pay the vendor $100,000 on your behalf. We typically get first and last payment up front, so very nominal amount of money up front. But I think the main difference is it's quicker. It's more expensive typically, depending on credit, of course.
Sure.
And yeah, they're just completely different financial tools. And I always tell people, and I know it sounds like I'm bagging on banks. I always tell people, go to your bank first. That's where you're going to find your cheapest money. If I was starting a brewery or if I was buying equipment, I'd go to my bank first too, and I'd see what they have to offer and what the process looks like.
Now, are you finding that I've done multiple podcasts here in the last couple of months where a lot of guys are going, I mean, canning has been a big thing here with the pandemic and whatnot, but getting access to aluminum is running about 3 months behind as a deliverable. Do you guys, in situations like that, are you more apt to do more of the 100% financing? Or if we know there's going to be a stagnation or delay, do you have to bring more to the table as far as a down payment goes? Or in a situation like that, the 100% would still apply? I think that's I think that's a question in today's environment that people are kind of, can I get a specific answer on this?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I wish you hadn't brought it up. Let's not put it out there. Our industry it's a great industry in a lot of ways. It's very flexible. We're very quick to react, but we're really looking, for the most part, we're looking at personal credit to make decisions, personal credit and business credit to make decisions. And so, if somebody comes to us and says, "Hey, we need a canning line," and it's a really borderline credit, and I know enough about the industry to know that there's aluminum shortages, or hey, maybe you can get a whole load of cans, but you can't find the lids. I might say, you know what? I don't know if you've got the runway to make it. You might be able to make a couple payments on this machine, but you're never going to make it until you can get those cans and those lids. We might say that, but I haven't seen that yet. It's still really just based on, hey, we see you've got a good pay history on similar debt in the past. You have good personal credit. Yeah, we'll get that done for you and we'll make it quick. And I guess we kind of trust that the client knows what they're getting into, and hope that we're making the right decision. But we do also know that canning line is still valuable to somebody else if it doesn't work out for whoever it is that we finance it for. And so we are taking a risk for sure. We certainly don't want to have to repossess a piece of equipment, and thankfully, knock on wood, haven't had to do it very much at all in 15 or 16 years. But if we do have to do it, we know we can read it.
Gotcha. I mean, with regards to the tax side of things, I mean, what are some of the benefits to leasing versus owning? I mean, you mentioned depreciation earlier, but just circle back to that point for me. What would be the benefits from a tax perspective, leasing versus owning?
Yeah. Well, for a true lease, the real benefit is just writing off the monthly payment. And again, we do very few of those. It used to be a really popular product, but I mean, pretty much not in my lifetime as a leasing guy. The vast majority of clients we work with are buying equipment or financing equipment with a $1 buyout lease or the equipment finance agreement that I mentioned. And both, from terms of like tax ramifications, they're both the same thing. It's almost as if you paid cash for the equipment, the way you treat the taxes. I think the benefit is taking a long-term asset and spreading out the ownership of it over 4 or 5 years. I talked to some accountants way back in the day when I was just kind of interviewing them for an article I was writing about brewery financing. And one of them had said, don't use short-term money for a long-term asset. It just doesn't make any sense. Buy that, use that money for grain or advertising or something you can't finance. And so I didn't answer your question with regards to taxes, but I think the benefit is really just spreading out your cash flow.
Sure. I mean, I'm a big proponent of using leverage the right way, right? So if I can take a full cup and pour it into a bathtub and stretch it out, I think there's definitely some added benefits to that. I mean, do you find that most of the breweries prefer owning the equipment at the end of the lease? And going forward that way, or do you think they repurpose and resell and try to find newer technology or whatever that's going on in the space at that given time?
Sure. Yeah. They do. They want to own the equipment. And my advice is generally, why wouldn't you want to own the equipment? Because it's worth that equipment. It would be different. Again, if it was a copier, you wouldn't want to own it because it's useless at the end of 3 or 4 years. And it has no resale value. But a fermenter has very few moving parts. It's a big stainless steel vessel that any other brewery would be happy to have in their cellar. Fermenter cellar. I got that one wrong. But anyways, they can. What I say is, okay, so you've got you're going to make payments on this thing for 3 years. At the end of that term, you have the option to own it for $1. Why wouldn't you spend that dollar? And if you don't need it anymore, sell it. You can probably still get 50% what you paid for it already. Make a lot of money back that you spent on interest and whatnot. You could return it to us. We could put you up in a lease like that. But you just spent 3 years making payments on this thing, and now you've got nothing to show for it. There are some tax advantages, but to me, I always tell people, talk to your accountant, but to me, it doesn't make sense. It's,
Understood. Well, as my day-to-day job as an advisor, I mean, my main goals are to educate, guide, and counsel that will allow us to change and pivot as life happens, right? So when you guys issue an equipment lease or you help a brewery with finance, how involved do you guys stay in throughout the process? Are you there for support? Are you there to answer questions? Or is it sign on the dotted line and we'll see you when the payment's done, when all the payments are done?
Yeah, it's probably, I would love to say that we're sitting there calling them every week and holding their hand through any questions that we have. But the reality is we're really busy too. And thankfully the brewers keep us busy. I check in from time to time. Obviously I'm always here to answer questions if somebody has one. Hopefully if I've done my job, I've answered all the questions I can up front before they sign anything, because I don't ever want to be responsible for putting somebody into something that they're not comfortable with. The reality is, they sign their pick. We fund the vendor. The vendor does their job and delivers the equipment. And as long as there's no problems, as long as that equipment's doing what it's supposed to be and generating cash for the brewery, our customers really don't call us until they need something more, or if they want to pay off a quote or something like that. And I stay in touch with, the occasional blast email that says, hey, don't forget the end of the year is coming up. Don't forget your Section 179 deduction, or, can we help you with working capital, get through tax season or whatever, something like that. But I'm not as hands-on as I'd like to say that I am, but I'm also not invisible. I'm very easy to get a hold of. I'm really easy to find. I do pick up my phone and return phone calls for sure.
That's great. I mean, you mentioned cash flow. I mean, cash flow is paramount. I mean, when a group comes to you guys, do you kind of educate them on the benefits of what you guys can provide and open up the cash flow to be? I mean, you said it just a few minutes ago, use that dollar somewhere else, whether it's in marketing or advertising, et cetera. What do you guys, what is part of some of the dialogue that you guys have initially with improving a brewery's cash flow, or maybe offering them something that they haven't thought about before through the process of trying to gain financing with you guys?
Sure. Yeah. So I think most of the people who apply with us have already been through the rigmarole of talking to their bank. And so they've already considered what that looks like and when what cash flow means to them. What I try to do is point out, we can structure financing in a lot of different ways. My advice is generally, or if I have advice to offer, is, I always advise, group you're comfortable with, because again, with the leases, payoff is calculated. The way you're going to save money is to shorten the term. As it goes towards cash flow, we only charge typically the first and last payment up front. And I like to point that out because, again, a bank's going to take 20% right off the top. Sure. Typically, anyways, paying them in the corner. But so I don't have to do, thankfully, I guess, a ton of hand-holding. By the time people call us, they know pretty much what they want or what their needs are. And as much as I would like to say it's because there's some wonderful benefit to leasing or something like that, my gut tells me after this many years of doing it, it's really just because we offer a quick and simple solution. Gotcha.
Now, I mean, if somebody comes to you and they say, well, maybe this option's too expensive right now, I'll just pay cash for the equipment. Do you guys try to kind of pull that conversation back and say, let's not put all your eggs in one basket. Let's kind of use that analogy I used earlier as, hey, let's take a short-term solution and put it in a bathtub to free up your cash to do something else. Sure. What are some of the benefits you guys try to provide with saying, hey, don't put all your cash over here, utilize some different strategies that could benefit the business?
Yeah. I'm probably not a great sales guy because when somebody tells me that they've made up their mind that they're going to do this or that, I typically just say, hey, that's your business decision to make. I hope it works out well for you. We'll keep the approval open for 90 days. If you change your mind, a lot of times somebody will go pay cash for that equipment and then realize, 75 grand is a lot of money to not have in my account all of a sudden. Sure. And we can do a quick, some quick paperwork and get them reimbursed, or reimburse them for half of it or something like that. But I'm not, I'm here to answer any questions. I'm certainly want to get deals done, but I've never been one of those guys who's going to try to talk somebody out of a decision they've already made.
Yeah. I mean, given the environment we've been in for the last 18 months with the pandemic and everything, are you seeing an uptick of more breweries coming to you first, then going to the local bank, just given that, everything that's been in kind of the sphere of earth these last year and a half, with dislocations of various supply chains to, kind of this wait and see mode if we're going to get federal funding or we're going to finance this that the banks have been dealing with for the last year and a half. Are you seeing an uptick of more people choosing to come to you first and just skipping the local bank entirely?
We did get, especially as the pandemic hit and before all that federal money was kind of sussed out, we got absolutely hammered with requests for financing for canning lines. And it was, again, I keep coming back to this, but it was the easy button. Like, we got a lot of old customers out there who are like, oh shit, let's call Brewery Finance because we know we can get this thing on order, by the end of the week. And then what I'm seeing, honestly, is once, some of that federal money came through, we're getting a lot of payoff requests because, okay, now we've got this really cheap, big wad of cash sitting in the account and we got to do something with it. So yeah, I mean, it all depends. Some people know that they're not bankable, and some people have to get educated that they're not bankable, and they won't learn that until until they beat their head against a couple walls at a couple different banks. And and I'm always impressed with brewers. They're so creative and so persistent. It might be that fifth bank that you, open the door to that finally says yes. I'll take a look at someone's credit and be like, oof, this is a little bit too good to be true. And then they get to the point where they're like, okay, No, we can't do this.
Right.
And a year later, I see their Facebook page, they got their doors open and they're, full steam ahead. So, yeah, it's, I guess to answer your question, we did certainly see an uptick, as the pandemic hit. I think now a lot of businesses are, I don't know if used to is the right word, but they're using that federal money. And so there was this initial wave of applications, and then it kind of tapered off.
Right.
As that money was coming in and people trying to figure out how to use it and what's the best use of their funds and what equipment can they buy and that kind of thing. But it's been pretty consistent over the last 4 or 5 months. Nothing like it was pre-pandemic. That was a rocket ship ride for a while. And now it's brewers are more cautious and lenders are more cautious, and everyone's kind of looking things over and just trying to figure out, okay, is this a good fit for our credit appetite, our lending appetite? And brewers are wondering, gosh, do I really want to get $250,000 or more debt when we don't know if we're going to be shut down again?
Very true.
So
very true. Well, let me ask you this: with you guys being in Colorado, are you kind of in that Mountain West region, or have you done business throughout the entire country as far as the four corners of the United States here? Yeah,
we have been nationwide since day one. Certainly we have a pretty strong foothold in the Mountain West just from being physically here. For a long time, our former parent company was in Washington, so we had some boots on the ground there. But we've been nationwide from the beginning. I'm real proud of some of the customers that we've worked with over the years. Maui Brewing Company is one of our first customers way back in the day. Here locally, we've got Oscar Blues long time ago, Ska, one of my favorite breweries. But we worked with Terrapin Beer Company down in Georgia before they were acquired or whatever. We've had a lot of clients out there who came to us when they were in that growth stage, right before they really blew up. And it's really cool to have been a very small part of getting them to that stage, and a lot of them I've remained friends with over the years. It's really cool to go to beer festivals or conferences and whatnot and see these guys that are like, oh shit, man, we're all still here. This is crazy.
Well, that's I often talk about this a lot, is growth can be fickle, man. It's you want to grow at the right rate and speed that you don't get too far over your skis, right? So it's
sure.
And just in Indiana here alone, I think we're up to around 183 breweries just in this state. So,
wow.
And I just did a podcast with Triton that will probably come out this week, and they were one of the older dogs around here for a while. Have you guys had any experience with any here in the state of Indiana?
I'm sure that we have. I would have to look at my database and see to come up with a name for you. Well, I'll say this: I would be surprised if we don't.
Gotcha.
And I guess I could follow up with you. I don't know.
I still don't know if it was wanted to give a shout out to here on the podcast, man. I mean, it's, I think there's, a lot of questions around financing. I've been in financial services going on 20 years, and there's a common question whether you're in the real estate side, the equipment side, is soft costs. I mean, do you guys cover things like soft costs, whether it's installs, delivery, maybe there's setup or training that's involved for the equipment that comes? Sure. Do you guys assist in covering the soft costs, or are you guys just dialed into the specific equipment there?
Yeah, no, we have a kind of a built-in policy of we'll allow at least 20% of the funding amount to go towards soft costs.
Gotcha.
So generally speaking, that would be installation, training, shipping. That doesn't include tax. If there's any kind of tax due, that's its own separate thing that just gets thrown on top of it. But so again, if we have $100,000 deal, 20 grand of it can be for, stuff we'll never recover if we ever have to repossess the equipment. And I mean, that's all learning how to use. It's all part of buying the equipment. We can't leave somebody hanging out there with brand new depalletizer, that idea how to operate.
Gotcha. Well, I know there's got to be there's a million questions you can ask around this subject of finance, but I think we pretty much did a great job of kind of hitting the high points. That if somebody had a question, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys at Brewery Finance? If somebody listens to this and says, hey, they brought up a topic that it's kind of been sticking our craw for a bit, why don't we
Sure.
just get some education or reach out to them? What's the best way to contact you guys and
Sure.
get some knowledge?
I totally appreciate the opportunity. It's funny when you ask me that. Just a quick digression here. I was being interviewed on American Craft Beer Radio a couple of years ago, and I was super nervous and wasn't prepared for them to kind of throw it to me like, "Hey, what's your phone number?" And my mind went completely blank. Like I have no idea what my phone number is or how to get a hold of me. The best thing to do is probably all my contact information is on the website. It's just breweryfinance.com. My email is real easy, rickw@breweryfinance.com. And yeah, my phone number, everything's all out there. We do have social media, but as a finance guy, it's hard to get followers.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
So if you like what you heard, go to @Brewery Finance through Twitter and Instagram.
Well, I love you guys' website, man. You guys, your website cracks me the hell up, man. Putting the F back at funding. Who is that? Who is that gentleman that's doing that video?
Okay, that's perfect. That's a perfect question because he's the host of American Craft Beer Radio, the one where I lost my mind and couldn't remember. Yeah, his name is Gary Valier. He has got a perfect radio voice, as you can see those in those commercials. And we tapped on his shoulder to be the pitch man for those commercials. And as far as I'm concerned, he nailed it out of the park. I love playing around with the F word like that. Yeah. And it's, I appreciate you mentioned that. I love those commercials. And again, we haven't done a great job of getting them out there, but they crack me up every time I see them.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned social media. I mean, that's probably the first and only thing I'd put up on social media because I love them, man. I loved it. Well, before my last question here, I want to circle back to this point. You said you were a home brewer, and I always love asking the brewmasters that sit down for the podcast or anybody that's connected to the beer business that was a home brewer is that, when I go to a brewery, those are the successes that made the taps. But there's always one beautiful story about something that maybe sounded good on paper or ended up, maybe you wanted to try a few different things and then it just ended dead on arrival and just was utter shit. As a home brewer, you said you weren't the greatest. So circling back to that, there has to be a fun conversation about a blend that you tried that just came out terribly.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah. My very first batch of homebrew was in college, and I've had a lot of crappy batches since then, but the first one is an extract brew. Again, I was going to school in this town called Greeley, which is probably, 40 minutes or an hour away from Boulder. And Boulder was the nearest place I could find a homebrew shop. And I believe, I'd have to ask him to find out, but I believe that the owner of that homebrew shop, it was Paul Gotza from the Brewers Association. Like, I remember going in there, and that, if it wasn't him, it was his damn doppelganger. I can tell you that much. So anyways, I drove all the way down there. This is before the internet, right? I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I read a couple books, and I bought an extract batch, and I was reading the instructions, a little copy of paper that had been copied 4,000 times or something. So it's all wonky and jacked up. And I'm not understanding what it's telling me how to it wanted me to heat up the extract, the malt extract by putting it in the water as it was warming up. And I thought, well, that's easy enough. So I just dropped this whole plastic bucket down into this big old jug of water I was heating up over on the stove, and immediately the bottom of the bucket of malt just completely melted out and stuck to the bottom of the pan, the pot that I was using. And so I go to pull it up, and there's no bottom on it anymore, and all the malt went down there. Well, I dumped that entire batch in the grass because I knew I wasn't very smart, never have been, but I knew that making beer with a bunch of melted plastic in it wasn't a good idea. So I dumped that in the grass. I drove all the way back to freaking Boulder, bought a whole nother batch from who I think was Paul, and then drove back to my dumpy little apartment in Greeley and made a whole nother batch. We fermented it in a closet by a washing machine, I think, or where washing machine should have been. And yeah, it was terrible. I couldn't tell you what it tasted like. I remember my roommate loved it. I mean, he was drinking it like a crazy person, but I couldn't get one down. I'll just put it this way. It was alcohol, It was not beer. It was not.
Well, maybe
beer.
he was an early fan of kombucha that you said
Right.
that you help out with. So he was getting used to that taste early on, man.
That's right. But I've had a lot of bad batches. I would say that the best mistake I ever made was fermenting a Hefeweizen, which was one of my favorite styles. I still love it. I don't, I have. This is before I knew the right levels in that Hefeweizen, and it came out absolutely delicious, despite like fermenting in my dining room right near a window that was right by the sun, and despite having just a terrible yeast count and all this kind of stuff. And I was talking to a friend who is a brewmaster, and I was asking him, God, that was the best beer I've ever made. I've never been able to duplicate it. And he's like, well, yeah, because you fucked it up in all the right ways for a Hefeweizen. You did exactly what you needed for a Hefeweizen.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. All right, Rick, last question, man.
Sure.
When I sit down with my clients or prospects for the first time, I often ask the same question that, if we were to start working together, what would need to transpire in the next 3 years, whether it be professionally, financially, even emotionally, that we can look back on our time spent together and say with absolute certainty that it was valuable.
Sure.
As it relates to what you guys are doing at Brewery Finance, I mean, if we sat down to do another podcast 3 years from now, what do you want to see happen with your group there in Colorado with Brewery Finance that if you accomplish in 3 years, you're going to look back and say, man, that we set out to do everything we did coming out of this very unique time frame that we've all been in depth with?
That is such a great question, and I appreciate you asking it. And I think there's obvious financial goals and that kind of thing, but for me, especially coming out of the pandemic, just a quick story. So, like I said, we started this thing 15 or 16 years ago. 8 or 9 years ago, we were acquired by a company that was up in Washington, and that company was then acquired by another company in California right as the pandemic hit. It's been a lot of transitions, and through all that, the thing that I miss the most is just fun, just having fun. It was that emotional element. So we'll call this breaking news because it's happening as we speak. But I'm in the process of taking Brewery Finance back, and it's going to be my company 100% all over again.
Oh, wow.
And so over the next 3 years, thank you. I'm stoked. I'm nervous, but stoked. The chief thing that I want to accomplish when I look back over the last 3 years is I want to continue building cool, fun relationships with clients. And I want to be a part in helping breweries be successful. And I just want to have fun. That's what it is to me anymore. I've worked really hard. I've gone through the grind. COVID beat the hell out of a lot of us.
Sure.
And I'm ready to just go out there and smile again.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, that's a perfect way to end this thing. Rick, I appreciate you jumping on today. For all those that are looking to get some education, learn about how they can level up their business or just get access to cash if you're just starting up, contact Rick and his team at Brewery Finance, man. I really appreciate you doing this, brother. Cheers.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Cheers, brother.
All right, man.
Appreciate
You have a great rest of your day. Pleasure.
Take care.
Right.
Well, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. For the latest on financial views with Local Brews, please check out our website at financialviewswithlocalbrews.com. You can also find us on YouTube via our channel there under the same name, Financial Views with Local Brews, as well as follow us on all of our social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, where you can like and connect with us throughout the craft beer universe that we're trying to explore here in the great state of Indiana. As always, cheers. The next round's on me, and I look forward to seeing you for future episodes. Bye, everyone.